Last-minute shakeup at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning ride is okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as simple as 1, 2, 3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
what's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
Let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
You're listening to the Peak Physique Podcast with Andre Adams on the NASM Podcast Network.
Hey guys, welcome back to another exciting episode of the NASM Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Adams, NASM Master Trainer and IFBB Physique Olympian. Today, we've got a special treat for you. I'm going to be breaking down the PBC course. I'm going to give an overview. I've got a special guest who I'll announce in just a moment. And we're also going to do a deep dive on things like cardiovascular effects of anabolic androgenic steroids and best strategies for hypertrophy training. Welcoming to the Peak Physique Podcast for the very first time, my good friend and colleague, one of the SMEs, I should say the lead SME on our PBC Physique and Bodybuilding Coach course, Dr. Guillermo Escalante. Welcome, Guillermo.
Hey there. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I've been following this podcast. It's been fantastic to see you develop it here over the last little while. Great content, and very excited to talk about the Physique Bodybuilding coaching program and the partnership with the NPC, IFBB, and then some of the other juicy topics that we have here on muscle hypertrophy and anabolic steroid use and some of the potential cardiovascular risks that are associated with it.
Absolutely. Glad to have you, brother. It's been a while since you and I have had time to just sit down and really catch up. You know, I know last year we had some amazing discussion. I wish we could have recorded it. You know, it was like our bodybuilding breakfast club, we called it. But, you know, there's just so many things that, you know, when we put our heads together, we can talk about. Definitely hit one of those topics on the head. That's going to be the exciting new partnership with the NPC and IFBB Pro League. I know that one was huge, and you're one of the other people that would be smiling as big as me because we put so much work into making this course successful and hopefully elevating everyone's knowledge in the industry on things like prep coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. It was such a long time in the making over the years, and it was nice to really see it come to fruition. I still remember sitting down with Mike Vanagrassi at the International Society of Sport Nutrition Conference back in Florida, and we were just ideating about this concept and how we're going to put it together. And sure enough, a few years later, we started putting together an outline with a team. And then it was an honor first to be asked to be the lead SME, and then I was able to the NASM just gave me such liberty to put an all-star cast of individuals like yourself, and just some of the greatest minds in physique science. And if you actually see the roster, a majority of the folks are not just physique scientists, but they're also practitioners themselves, either as coaches or as competitors in different ways, shapes, or forms, right? So, we have Scott Stevenson, who's coached, an Olympian. We have Eric Trexler, we have Eric Helms, we have Brad Schoenfeld. So, Darren Willoughby. So, the names that have contributed to this, and I'm leaving, of course, a ton of people out. Dean St. Mart wrote that PED chapter and the dietary supplement chapter. So, a lot of these individuals, they've competed, and they've also been in the trenches, reading the science, reading the journals, conducting the studies in the physique space, and really understanding not only what actually happens on the field, but also what are some of the questions that need to be asked for us to really develop our physiques, hopefully as efficiently and as effectively as possible.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that too, Dr. G, because that's one of the initial questions that a lot of people that maybe aren't as familiar with NASM or didn't know that we put this course together. We actually finished this course around, I want to say 2 years ago now. And some of the initial feedback, everything was definitely positive, but there were, like I said, maybe people that were unfamiliar with our course, and they want to know, well, NASM is known for evidence-based science, gold standard in the general fitness space, but do they have what it takes to produce a successful bodybuilding course? And where's the, credibility? Are these actual bodybuilders and coaches? And so that's one thing that even on the NPC's announcement, I think there was a few people that were just wondering or curious, who the team was behind it. And I try to, educate them, to your point, on just some of the heavy hitters and notable figures on our roster for those, the SME team. It's honestly one of the most comprehensive and complete teams you could possibly ask for, from, like you said, practitioners that are either, highly successful athletes, prep coaches, have worked with Olympians, let's go novice all the way to Olympians, because I would say it's just as important to know how to work with somebody who's brand new to the sport. But then also PhDs and MDs, we got RDs, registered dietitians, and things like this. So a very complete team that stands behind the course. And one thing I like to say is that I think we did an excellent job building the framework. And this is really the foundation or the launching pad for subsequent courses and modules to come, right? This is that very good foundation that can make anyone, even if you're an experienced prep coach or athlete, a better coach. But again, we can get even more specialized with additional modules in the future.
Yeah, I want to highlight something that you said, because you hit it right on the nose. It's, this course is meant to be comprehensive in the bodybuilding space, right? So we talk about, basic anatomy, basic physiology. We talk about biomechanics. We talk about nutrition, metabolism. We talk about macronutrients, micronutrients. We talk about hydration. We talk about dietary supplements. We don't leave the stone unturned of performance enhancement drugs. We actually acknowledge it's hey, this exists. There are people that do compete naturally, but there's also a large percent of the population that enhances. So how do I, as a coach, navigate that space? So this is not supposed to be a deep dive in this particular chapter. We cover the big broad perspective of everything to allow opportunities to be able to then dive into further and further. But we do cover things such as peak week. We cover things such as exercise programming. We even talk about things that maybe you don't consider as a coach when you're first working with individuals, is how do you actually work with individuals, the psychology of working with individuals, behavior modification change. These are all important things, because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink that water. And this is where the psychology of coaching becomes also so incredibly important. So I think in a nutshell, what I like to say is that the purpose of the course is to provide enough breadth and depth to provide some minimal guideline standards, just like any entry-level practitioner, whether you're a physical therapist, whether you're a nurse, whether you're a physician, whatever schooling you go to gives you a minimal level of proficiency. And this was really the first base of the course, is let's get a minimal level of proficiency so people can be as informed as possible, as safe as possible. Athletes' health and safety is at the forefront of this. And then making sure that they're being as efficient as possible in prescribing the most evidence-based strategies to help the people succeed that they're working with. Or if you're maybe an athlete yourself, what can I do? So it just provides a minimum level of proficiency and level of understanding. So then it sets the foundation for these other modules that you're talking about, because you understand the anatomy, the physiology, the nutritional biochemistry, you can now actually dive deeper into these other concepts.
Yeah. And, one thing that a lot of people might wonder too is all right, well, I've taken maybe another course, or now I'm taking the NASM PBC course. And, does that mean that I don't need to continue learning other things? No, the whole point of what we're getting at is that these are all complementary, right? Knowledge and education is a continuum. We're going to keep providing the highest level of education using that evidence-based approach that NASM is renowned for, which is really latest and greatest scientific data and research, the coach's experience, right? There's going to be a bit of tribal knowledge baked in there from the industry. And then, of course, the client outcomes, right? So when we marry those three things together, and now we're, again, building out bigger and bigger network of other subject matter experts, we're going to continue to develop this knowledge and make it accessible for everyone. So I love that you talk about kind of setting the bar, right? We're setting a standard that the league is saying, hey, there's a lot of just misinformation or misunderstood information out there. Let's standardize this. And again, it sets that base level of that foundational level of knowledge where, like you said, you start to get specialized. Maybe you work with bikini competitors, maybe you work with super heavyweight male bodybuilders, and you're going to get really good at that. But this is where we start. Another question I think that comes up too, Dr. G, is I've actually chatted with our good buddy John Jewett recently, and shout out to John. John's going to actually be making an appearance on our podcast soon, and vice versa. And I think somebody had asked the question on Tyler Mannion's post. Hey, I took the J3U, one of the bodybuilding courses, and does that mean I shouldn't take the NASM one? And John and I both, chimed in like, hey, that's great that you've taken it. You should take both. And there's a reason, right? I mean, they're two totally different courses. NASM has a different level of accreditation, obviously. But I actually loved what John brings to the table too, right? There's a certain perspective that our course is written from, which is more on the educational and informative. This is what you need to know, right? Risks of things like androgenic anabolic steroids, and PEDs, diuretics, right? We're speaking to it more from a risk mitigation and what the coaches need to be aware of versus, hey, we're either, for or against these things, or here's a protocol for, right? We're not going to go there. So I think it's good to have knowledge. Something like John, for instance, is going to be very heavy in the application based, right? Whereas ours is, again, more from an educational and risk standpoint. And it's complementary information. I love it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And one thing that I want to highlight is, anytime that we learn, learning, we need to be forever students, and we never know everything. So what we know today, we need to continue to pile on that. And science never proves anything. Science actually just looks at, what's more probable, what's less probable. And as science advances, what you actually are accepting as the best acceptable way of doing things today may change 10 years from now, 15 years from now, because science evolves over time. And I think it's important for us to remain flexible in that and understanding, this is what the scientific method allows us to do, and learning from various perspectives and applying that science is really what's important. In fact, I want to highlight, John's course is actually an NASM approved course. So one of the things to maintain, some certifications, you have to do certain continuing education units every year. And I think, these types of continuing education units are a highlight of what you want to try to do. So if you're actually an NASM certified personal trainer, you can actually take John's course, and that'll actually give you continuing education units to maintain your certification current for the NASM personal trainer certification. That's a separate certification than this particular certification, but that's really the way it goes. I mean, any major professional organization, for me to maintain any of my current healthcare practitioner licenses, I have to provide certification that I'm going through continuing education on a regular basis, because I have a sports medicine background. If I were to treat a concussion the way that I learned about it in college 20 years ago when I was getting my degree, I would get sued for malpractice, because it's not the way we treat a concussion today.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. So you guys heard it here, continue that educational journey. And again, these are all complementary, right? So if you've got a degree, if you're a novice coach, you're experienced coach, you can never really have enough knowledge. And I guarantee you this course will add value to you, whatever level you're at. And, we'll kind of wrap with the NPC partnership details. I know Tyler's communicated his message, and again, it was very well received, but I want to highlight some of the benefits for the coaches and athletes as well. If you're a coach, this is one way to put another feather in your cap, help distinguish yourself as an elite coach, right? That's gone through the training, right? This is the official certification of the NPC and IFBB Pro League. And, if you guys go to npcnewsonline.com, you can actually grab the bundle, which is going to be the PBC course and the Meal Prep Made Easy course by our buddy, RD Chris Tuttle. you can get that 50% off at npcnewsonline.com. But what I love is that those people that are maybe new to the sport or looking for a coach, you're able to go in there and there's a locator where you can actually look up your coach's credentials, see if they've gone through the training and certification, make sure they're legit. And, again, as a coach, that gives you extra recognition. You're also going to produce a better outcome for your athletes, safer, healthier outcome for your athletes, and start to build that credibility because you're now backed by NASM, again, official course of the league. So highly recommend it. It's going to help you produce better outcomes for your athletes and ultimately earn more, right? And begin to build your business. So guys, make sure you check that out, npcnewsonline.com. And if you guys are just tuning in, this is the Peak Physique Podcast. We've got a very special episode with our good friend, Dr. Guillermo Escalante. We just broke down the NASM PBC course overview, details on this exciting new partnership with the NPC and IFBB. And I want to dive into some advanced training strategies. So you and I have both done a lot of speaking, I'm sure, over the years on this topic. You've got a paper right now, I believe, that is almost complete. Are you guys waiting for peer reviewing? Where are you at with your hypertrophy papers?
Yeah, it's actually one of the other SMEs, Dr. Adam Gonzalez, actually, he led the authoring of this paper, but I was one of the co-authors of this paper with another great group of scientists. But it is on advanced training techniques for muscle hypertrophy and different strategies you can implement. So we actually just finished the paper. I want to say maybe 2 weeks ago, and then it is already has been submitted for peer review, and it is currently under peer review in the National Strength and Conditioning Journal. So, and this is going to be specifically for a special edition for physique and bodybuilding. So I'm actually one of the co-editors that putting together this piece. It's going to be the second edition of this special edition for physique and bodybuilding within the Strength and Conditioning Journal. So it's a peer-reviewed publication, and one of the things that it does, it actually breaks down the science, and then it provides a lot of the practical applications piece. So this is going to be one of those papers, hopefully gets accepted, but in the peer review process right now. So we're excited for it.
Excellent. I love it. I'm a geek for science. I'm a data guy. So anytime I see, new case studies, white papers, things like this coming out where we're comparing different training techniques or nutritional strategies, I'm all about it. So I did have a chance to take a peek at this one. And, a lot of the concepts that you guys are breaking down, some of them might be familiar, right, to our audience, and some of them might be new, or maybe they're executing these principles and they're not even aware of it. So what I'd like to go through is really, breaking down some of those mechanisms that help drive hypertrophy. What do those progressions and execution of these strategies look like? So let's start at the top, Dr. G. Let's go with some supersets. I know I love me some supersets. That, my dad actually taught me about those way back in the beginning when I started as a young teenager. And, we might do adjacent muscles. We might do like a bicep and tricep superset or a chest and a back superset. And there's maybe 4 or 5 different ways that we could approach this. So let's break it down. Let's start with agonist supersets. Let's explain that for our audience. And then again, any tips for executing an agonist superset?
Yeah. So if we go with the agonist superset, that basically means you're working the agonist muscles in 2 different exercises. And then again, supersets can be done. You may call these maybe paired sets, or if you do 3 or more or 4 sets, you're going to trisets, right? Or giant sets. So you're kind of grouping them together, but they all kind of fall into the superset, I'm going to say, umbrella, and then you can kind of break them down collectively. But agonist, as the name sounds, you're basically working the agonist muscle group using a different exercise for the same muscle group. So if you're doing, let's say, a back agonist, let's say you're doing a paired set. In this case, you would be doing something like a lat pull down followed by, let's say, a row. So you're hitting the same muscle group. And of course, you can implement isolation exercises if you want, or you could do compound exercises if you want. So like you could do an isolation to a compound type of set, which would be like now a straight arm pull down next to a now underhand grip pull down, right? So you have that compound movement. and that was preceded by that isolation type movement. So a lot of cool ways in which you can implement this agonist superset. But I would like to preface this that, these are, in the scientific world, we call these advanced training techniques. But a lot of bodybuilders say, it's like, well, I kind of do that like all the time. I was like, well, yeah, because compared to the average person, the bodybuilder is typically going to be an advanced trainer, right? This isn't necessarily something you would do, prescribing something, week one, day one of a strength training program to your client. It wouldn't be appropriate. But bodybuilders often do implement a lot of these different strategies. And I also want to highlight one of the things that we've been looking at in the literature is not only the efficacy of these, but also, are they more efficacious? Do they create more hypertrophy than traditional sets? And what we see in most of the literature right now, and I'm going to explain a little caveat to it, is that there really is no statistically significant difference between doing, let's say a superset strategy compared to doing a traditional set strategy. But this is when volume is equated, of course, right? So if you equate volume, you're going to get about the same outcome in terms of muscle growth. But you can do it in much less time, right? So you can actually do the same workout with the same type of volume, in about 33%, 40% less time. So instead of having to spend, an hour and 20 minutes in the gym, now if you implement some of these strategies, now you're maybe spending 40 minutes in the gym, 45 minutes in the gym to be able to implement some of these. And I like to say that caveat because one thing that sometimes people forget about is in science, we have to really kind of control all of the different variables as much as possible, right? Because you want to pull on a lever and you're going to say, when I pull on this lever, this is the potential outcome. But it's important to understand that in the real field, like the reason bodybuilders implement these advanced training techniques is not necessarily to equate volume. They're actually doing it to increase training density. So that way you can implement more volume in a short period of time. And a bodybuilder, the way these are typically laid out, you're going to typically do some traditional sets, and then you may finish off with one or two exercises and then add more volume or intensity to that particular muscle group to maybe make that muscle grow. So maybe on a lagging body part, you want to squeeze in more volume. You're going to maybe pay more attention, and you can implement some of these advanced training techniques to help enhance that.
Yeah, you actually read my mind there, Dr. G. And I'm thinking, as we're talking through it out loud, how do I traditionally use it even for my own training? And a couple things that you mentioned that really stood out to me. I love the compound agonist, right, to isolation. And then you mentioned a weak point or lagging body part, right? If we've got that certain muscle group, let's take a bikini competitor and maybe her, glute medius is underactive. Maybe we're pairing a compound movement like a belt squat with, a side-lying hip abduction, leg raise, right? So you might do, let's say your 8 to 12 reps on your belt squat and then superset that with those isolated side-lying hip abductions to fire the glute medius and really just try and enhance or increase overall muscle activation on that lagging part. So that's one strategy that I would use. Another potential benefit, I would say two potential benefits of doing the supersets or giant sets, saving the time for sure. There could be additional metabolic stress, right? We know that metabolic stress is one of those mechanisms for hypertrophy. There's a lot of benefits. I would say also total calorie burn. That could be another one too. If we're doing the same total work volume in 40 minutes instead of 60, maybe our heart rate is taxed a little more, our central nervous system gets hit a little harder, and we're effectively burning calories at a higher rate. So that's another potential. We'd have to see the data. And then just thinking through the giant sets, love it, right? So to Dr. G's points, that's gonna be 3 or more exercises. And I've actually got a favorite one. I'll just go ahead and say it here so you guys can try this one out. It's one of my favorites. On shoulder day, I actually love to do some dumbbell Arnold press, moderate weights, right? There's a lot of slow twitch muscle fiber in our shoulder. So I'll go a weight that I can comfortably handle about 15 reps with, dumbbell. And then without setting the dumbbells down, I'll go into either around the world or shoulder bombs, which is basically a partial around the world, right into 15 reps of, bent over reverse fly or reared up fly. So I'll do that maybe 3 or 4 giant sets. And the other thing you'll notice is better pumps, right? We're forcing that blood flow into those specific muscles, increasing demand and stimulus. And Dr. G, it'd be interesting to see, looking at muscle protein synthesis, is there any change by super or giant setting versus traditional horizontal loading through a workout?
Yeah, and I think those are all interesting questions. And definitely, I mean, the primary driver for muscle hypertrophy is, of course, the mechanical tension. And one of those things is obviously as you're creating some fatigue, you're going to obviously call into demand and into play these different higher threshold motor units. So you're going to eventually go to failure and near failure, and you can actually fatigue that way. But metabolic stress is a secondary mechanism for that muscle hypertrophy. And I always like to look at I like the mechanistic data to some extent, but I think more of as an applied physiologist, I always like to see is like when the rubber meets the road, like does it actually create more muscle hypertrophy? So I love to see the mechanistic stuff at the molecular level, cool. But I also really like to see, like, let's measure the ultrasound. Let's look at did we actually increase muscle thickness or muscle cross-sectional area in that deltoid? So even acute studies, great. Acute studies are important mechanistically to understand why certain things might work. But I love to kind of come over to the other end where let's put together a training protocol, right? Mm-hmm. And in these types of studies, the ones that I love to see are the ones where the individuals serve as their own controls, because obviously now you take genetics out of it, you take inter-individual variability out of it, and you could maybe train one shoulder one way and another shoulder another way. And I'm going to give an example. So maybe you do traditional sets of shoulder presses on the left arm, and then on the right arm, maybe you do, one of these types of combination types of techniques. And then you could actually see, does the deltoid actually grow over, say, an 8-week period of time significantly more than the other? A lot of times these are done on the quads. It's obviously easier to measure that in the quads. So you measure one quad doing one type of exercise, another quad doing another type of exercise or another type of technique. And then you can actually look at the differences in muscle hypertrophy there. Of course, you can also measure other variables too, right? Like, did you actually get stronger? That's another thing. And then even like if you're looking at a big muscle like the quad, you could actually look at different hypertrophy at different levels of the quad, right? So you could look at what happened at the distal quad, what happened at the mid quad, what happened at the proximal quad. And then you could look at if there's some sort of a hypertrophy that's going to be occurring differently, because sometimes they've actually done some of these studies, and you actually find that certain techniques are going to increase hypertrophy more maybe at the distal segment, not so much different at the middle segment or at the proximal segment. So these are some of the different things that I love to see. And then, of course, the performance measures. To me, those are obviously very important. And as a physique scientist, this is what I love to see, is because this is ultimately, if you think back to what Arnold said in Pump and Iron, right? He says a bodybuilder is like a sculptor. The difference is a sculptor sculpts with the chisel and a bodybuilder sculpts in the gym. So here now we're studying the tools for what is the best way to chisel and what are the best tools in the gym to chisel our body if we want to create, let's say, distal segmental hypertrophy of the quadricep, or or maybe growth of the upper pec. Like what is the best way to really achieve that? And you can actually use some of these studies to see that.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff is new to people, myself included. When I went back and retook our own course, right? We all contributed different areas to, like, PBC, for instance. And I'm like, all right, let me go back and retake the whole course, because there's some sections that I'm not as familiar with, right, that are not my strong points. And I think that was one of the questions that actually tripped me up the first time I took the course was, it was eccentric loading on the quads and, increasing distal hypertrophy, right, segmental. And I had to really think. And once you understand it, right, instead of trying to memorize answers, when you understand the way that these relationships are working through, different techniques in the gym, you can get a lot smarter about how you're programming, an athlete's bodybuilding training. So I love it. The other thing I would mention in there too is, whenever we're doing studies, I remember looking back at even like Brett Contreras's work on, the glute development stuff in the early days with or without a mini band, right? Doing a hip thrust versus a glute bridge versus a squat or a quadruped kickback. And they're measuring different amounts of muscle activation, right? But one thing that they discovered, and this might hold true for us too, Dr. G, is looking at a novice, I don't even want to call them an athlete. Let's just take a novice lifter compared to a well-trained athlete who's very experienced or very advanced. And, for us, when we go through the mechanics of a squat, for instance, we're already, I set my base, I'm in sure foot position, right? Those quads are kind of corkscrewed or twisted out. I've got my glute medius active before I even start the movement. And your ability to mind muscle connect and activate certain muscles or recruit those fibers is gonna be a lot stronger than somebody who's completely new to lifting, where those external cues from a band or even just a trainer helping tap a certain muscle to wake it up a little bit, it's going to be a significant difference. So we might notice too in hypertrophy outcomes a difference between novice lifters versus advanced trained athletes. Just something to keep in mind. Two other things I want to weave in there before we move on. Drop sets, another one that's in your study. I love me some good drop sets, and then maybe let's walk somebody through how to, write this application based. If you're doing a drop set, let's say you're bench pressing, and you've got 100 pounds. We'll keep the math easy here. And you're going to go to MMF or momentary muscle failure. And let's say that we try to target around that 10 to 12 rep range, something like this. And then we're going to peel some of the weights off. In Arnold's day, they called it the stripping method. And Dr. G, what do you normally recommend for your drop sets? I'm usually in that kind of 20 to 25% range per drop.
Yeah, I usually go on the very low end, I go 10, but I usually 20 is usually kind of my sweet spot. About a 20% drop is usually what I utilize. And then, depending on what I'm trying to do, I like to do, if I'm going to do a drop, I usually do at least two. Some people just do one, but I like to do at least two. Sometimes I'll go 3 or 4 if I'm really, want to torture myself to be able to do that.
Yeah, same. I think on average, I usually target around 3 drops, but I'm with you on that. It kind of depends on what our starting weight is. If it's a weight stack machine versus, plates that are loaded on a barbell, but definitely an excellent technique for you guys. It's going to help stimulate those muscles a little bit differently. And then the last one, very similar to a drop set, is going to be one of my personal favorites, rest pause. If we look at contrasting against the drop set where, the reps are relatively constant, but the weight is the main variable, a rest pause is sort of the opposite, right? Where the weight is constant and the reps are going to be reducing each set, anywhere from 10 to 20 seconds rest between those sets where we're approaching, near momentary muscle failure. And same thing, I usually target about 3. So I might go, let's say we've got that 100 pounds on an exercise again, and I hit, 12 reps on set 1. I rest for around 15 seconds, come in right back in, and maybe I can do 5 or 6 reps, rest 15 seconds, go right back in and try to finish with 3 to 5 reps. That would be, a good example for a rest pause.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I like to highlight too, which is some of the things that we actually talk about in the course is, the nuances within some of these. Like we talked about supersets, kind of like the umbrella. And then, okay, well, what are the different types of supersets? We talk about agonist, there's agonist antagonist, there's pre-fatigue. There's a lot of different ways. And then there's certain reasons why you may want to implement some over the other, right? Same thing with the rest pause, so we have this big umbrella of rest pause techniques. And then within those, we have, like Meyer reps is a type of rest pause. Cluster sets is another type of rest pause. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can kind of slice and dice it. Very similar principles apply in all of them. But ultimately it's a different way to strategically hit the muscle group. And again, one of the things that I always like to say is, it's not always about changing the exercise, but at the end of the day, if you've been lifting as long as you and I have, sometimes you want something different in the gym. And, at the end of the day, there's only so many exercises you can do, right? You don't need a million different exercises. In fact, I like exercise variety, but I think sometimes exercise variety can be overdone to the point where you have so much variety that you never progress anything and you never master anything. And sometimes people are only focused on the changing up the exercise, but But I'm a big advocate of, let's actually focus on this one exercise, and let's program this one exercise for the next 8 weeks, 12 weeks, to maximize our progress in there. And then within there, you can now implement some of these different strategies. So then now when you go to the gym, you're actually implement different strategies for the same exercise, nevertheless, and you're making that happen over time. And typically for one muscle group, again, I'm not saying you only do one exercise. We need a variety of exercises, but you don't need to change the exercise every week. So maybe have 2 or 3 core exercises for that muscle group. Those are your bread and butter for the next, 8, 12, 16 weeks. Work on those, progress on those. And then maybe you change your auxiliary exercises a little bit, but within those core exercises, this is where some of these advanced training techniques can really come into play. Or for lagging body parts, right? As I talked about earlier, to me, this is my favorite way to implement these strategies. So you can hit your traditional sets, and now you can really increase training density and also increase the training volume, obviously, in less time, which is the definition of increasing training density. And the intensity is pretty maximal because you're going to failure or near failure in all of these techniques all the time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I would agree 100%. When we're looking at really structuring the framework for somebody's training program, I totally agree that framework shouldn't change completely, right? I mean, we might have around 70% of those foundational exercises, especially ones that work well for your body.
Yes.
Pain-free, you're able to push hard and continue to progress intensity over time. And for us, we get the question a lot too with the NASM OPT model as we adapt and apply that to something like physique, right? Primarily, we're going to be working, let's say 80% of our time in that phase 3 muscle hypertrophy phase, right? There's times where we drop back down to strength endurance or stabilization, maybe integrate that into our warm-ups, and then even, tapping into a little bit of maximal strength at times. But the majority of our work is going to be done in that phase 3 hypertrophy phase. And in order to stay there and avoid plateau over longer periods of time, we want to make sure that we're getting those muscle adaptations by leveraging these principles. This will allow you to avoid that plateau. Maybe we're progressing intensity. We've got variable timing built into there. We've got some of these supersets, drop sets, isometric holds, right? Rest, pause sets. There's so many different levers that we can pull, but still stay primarily in that phase 3 hypertrophy without plateauing. So beautiful thing, guys. Make sure you try it. Keep a lookout for Dr. G's paper. When that's done, I'll be looking for it. So you let me know. I want to finish reading that. Definitely some great work there. The last thing we're going to wrap up is going to be on AAS, again, anabolic androgenic steroids, and the effects on the cardiovascular system. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in here. I know you're also working on a paper here, and there's a couple things that we'll dive deeper into. I think we'll kind of start high level. Let's maybe think about, delineating general population versus competitive bodybuilders. Why is this an issue? What are we seeing in the industry today from, average lifestyle clients that are maybe taking AAS, self-administering and things like this versus competitive bodybuilders?
Yeah, no, this is really interesting. It's an interesting topic. So one of the things that we kind of begin this paper with, there's another paper, by the way, it's under review as well. I wrote with Dr. Dean St. Mart and Dr. Lucas in Brazil, who's a physician. Anyway, the paper dives into first a little bit of the history and perspective on besides the bodybuilding world. I mean, the average user of anabolic steroids is kind of broadening. It used to be very much reserved for athletes, competitors, it's certain, but now it's really kind of going out into the demographic of, and this is where I get kind of worried, right? You get these teenagers or not even adults yet, 16, 17 that are dabbing into some of this stuff, or you get people that are just starting into lifting, and the first thing that they think of is like, well, what anabolic steroids do I need to take on? And I'm like, wait a second, like back up here. Like, let's talk about foundational stuff related to training, nutrition, sleep, let's talk about that first. But what we see now is there's a huge influence, and we see this sometimes, unfortunately, from these fitfluencers that are, we have people like, I don't know, the Trend Twins that are out there, right? That are, millions of followers, and, this is what people are seeing and what they're consuming. And they see, so, for me to look like that, I must need to take some of these substances. And we see just more and more people that are dabbing into it. We see more women than ever, taking some of these things. And some of these women are not competing, right? So then now we have to look at, in addition to some of the potential health risks, like cardiovascular risks, neurotoxic, but now we have even virilization in some of these women, right? The voice deepening, facial hair growth, clitoral growth. You have all of these other things. And there's a prevalence of that. So we see more people that didn't used to use that are actually now using. And sometimes there's a lot of misguided information in all of that. So we kind of begin the paper in that overview, like what's the prevalence, who uses, and then those that use, we also kind of highlight who actually has medical supervision when they're using some of this stuff, right? Like, are you actually being truthful to your doctor? Does your physician know what you're taking? And the reality is in some of the surveys that have been done, it's like only about 35 to 40% of the individuals are actually tell their physician what it is that they're doing. And the reality is if you are going to go into these endeavors, if this is your choice, 100% your physician should know everything that you're taking, and they should be part of your team to help you monitor all of these biomarkers, because they need to be aware of what's going on. So if your blood pressure is going up, if your cholesterol levels are changing, and you have now dyslipidemia. So these are some of the things that you need to be aware of on a regular basis. And you can't put your head in the sand. Well, you can. It's not the responsible thing to do. It's not the prudent thing to do, because if you put your head in the sand for long enough, this is now where we kind of see some of these problems, and anabolic steroids, it's not something that's going to kill you acutely, right? It's something that can create problems if abused, not monitored. You put your head in the sand for a long period of time, and then it's 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road. And we actually see some of the literature, and we dive into this in the paper, where we look at competitive lifters that have been on androgenic anabolic steroids for an extended period of time. And we look at their similar counterparts, same age, same lifting experience. Mm-hmm. And we actually this is particularly for the heart. That's what we focus in for this paper. And we actually see what happens to heart function over time, right? So there's cardiac remodeling that takes place. Left ventricular hypertrophy takes place. We see ejection fraction levels reduce. And ejection fraction is basically a measure of when all the blood that goes into your body is pumped up by your left ventricle in your heart, right? So you need to be efficient in that pumping action. So ejection fraction is the volume of blood that is in that left ventricle, and what percentage of it is actually left in that left ventricle. In other words, what percentage of it is not dispersed. So you really want that to be in the 60 to 70% mark to be really healthy. Definitely above 55%. But what we see is with chronic users over time, or when you're actually on a heavy cycle, that ejection fraction starts to drop. And you actually see it go down below the 50% level, which is kind of the beginning of a red flag of there's a problem going on here. So the only way that you're going to get that measured, that's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in cycle one. That's going to happen over years of use. Mm-hmm. And if you're not monitoring certain things, then this is going to lead to potential problems. Acutely, you're going to get increased red blood cell count. That's known as erythrocytosis. That's going to potentially create hypertension. So there's a lot of different mechanisms, a lot of different ways in which you can go. But really, this paper kind of talks about how you can mitigate some of these risks. Number one, by not abusing the stuff, watching dosage, length of exposure, going to your physician, and then specifically what you can actually monitor. What things in your blood work should you be monitoring? What things in your diet should you be implementing? What type of ancillary drugs may your prescribing physician prescribe to help mitigate some of these risks, whether maybe that be a hypertension drug, right? Or it may be a statin to help with the dyslipidemia. Fill in the blank, right? It could be a tadalafil to maybe help increase blood vessel vasodilation. So there's a lot of different things that can be implemented when medically supervised. So these are the things that I like to kind of highlight.
Yeah, and it's a complex animal, right? I mean, to your earlier point too, it's kind of the pink elephant in the room. I think a lot of people are maybe uncomfortable about talking to their doctor about it, or even their coach or their spouse or whoever. So it's important too. These are things that as coaches we need to be aware of, making sure that we have that kind of open, safe communication with our clients so that they feel comfortable disclosing anything they're on, because again, there could be all sort of different things from downstream health issues, like you said, blood pressure dysfunction, hypertension, could be drug interactions with other supplements or AAS and PEDs that they could be using. So we want to make sure that, again, we're communicating these things very clearly and you're able to identify some of these certain risk factors. And you definitely pointed out a lot of the big ones that I would commonly look for, or, we're trying to mitigate risk around left ventricular hypertrophy, scarring of the heart, right? Sometimes even going, a little bit tangent from the anabolic steroids, even things like clenbuterol and high amounts of T3, right? Things that can cause scarring of the heart. Those are all things that we can easily monitor with, basic biomarkers, good blood labs, EKG, Dr. G, any other assessments or things that maybe coaches should be looking for to check for some of these, the onset of these symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I want to highlight is, it's not the coach's job to prescribe this stuff. Yep. It's the coach's job to work as part of a team with a healthcare professional. So I'm going to say 99% of coaches are not medical doctors, right? So don't pretend to be, because you're not, right? So you need to make sure that I don't care how knowledgeable you are. Even myself, I am not a medical doctor. So I still work with my medical doctor to work on some of these things. However, I am very much on the lookout. It's like, I know what things I want to see. I want to know what kind of blood work I want to look at, but I want to work with them in unison. And then now we're working as a team together to be able to identify how things are working, what types of interventions are going to be most effective. Because I think a lot of coaches make that mistake is they go way out of bounds in their, what is in their scope of practice. Yes. And this is one of the things that I like to highlight is it's not to say that, you're dumb, that I'm not trying to be demeaning in any way. No, it's just a matter of your scope of practice is making athletes be as big as possible and making them as lean as possible, making sure that they get there effectively, right? And you're kind of the team leader, right? And so let the physicians be physicians. And one of the things you should ask to your client is, are you getting blood work done? These are the blood biomarkers we should be looking at. Yep. And you should be working with the healthcare practititioner, that individual's doctor, to be able to look at some of these things and then addressing those things. And then that way, if certain red flags pop up during that course, now you can have, as a team, the physician's going to be able to see, because they can see other drug interactions. They have a whole medical history. They can put all of these things together. Another important thing that you mentioned too is that a lot of times these anabolic androgenic steroids, even though they get the brunt of the negative press, they certainly have a contribution to a lot of these things, right? When not used correctly, or when abused, but they're not used in unison, right? So you're typically also utilizing maybe things like ephedra or high levels of high quantities of caffeine or clenbuterol, right? Which are not anabolic steroids. But now when you have all of these issues going on in your heart and you add these other layers on top of layers, now they can create almost the perfect storm for some of these things, because now you have stimulants on top of this, on top of that, which can create real problems.
Yeah, and let's not forget about diuretics, right? That's another one. Like you said, it's the stacking of these things and the interactions that can really cause some downstream issues. So I agree 100%. Make sure you guys build up a solid network of other professionals that specialize in these medical areas. You guys hear me talk a lot about our medical triage that, I use on Team Adams, for example. We've got our, local medical and nursing team, also does blood work, and they do all the hormones and everything. And then we've also got a naturopathic doctor, Dr. Indy, right? We do our HTMA, mineral, we call it biochemical therapy. But we've got people that specialize in every one of these areas. And to Dr. G's point, our job as coaches and athletes, you should be knowledgeable as an athlete too, is to really understand how to interpret some of these key markers on your health. We'll call it blood work and what other tests we need. We need to be able to identify when is an athlete at risk, right? And hey, this doesn't look right. This is a huge outlier. You need to seek medical attention. Let's follow up. Maybe they can run some additional tests. And it's a constant collaborative feedback loop to really give you the most effective, but also the safest outcome that we possibly can as coaches.
Yeah, I love that you have that team together because it's so important. And I always tell people, if you don't feel comfortable telling your healthcare provider or talking to them about these things or being honest with them, then it's time to find a new healthcare provider, one that you can trust and you can actually talk to honestly about all of the things that you are doing.
Absolutely. Guys, we could probably go on for the next week. This is an amazing topic, and I definitely want to revisit this and some of the additional work that you're doing, Dr. G. So for you guys that are out there, don't hesitate, reach out to either one of us. If you've got subsequent questions, if you want to know more on any of the topics we discussed today, or maybe you want to learn more about the Physique and Bodybuilding Coach Program, contact either one of us. Dr. G, where can they find you online?
So they can find me on @DrGFit. So it's spelled out DOCTOR GFit on Instagram. I also have a YouTube channel that has just started taking off slowly but surely, building more content in there. And it's the Dr. GFit YouTube channel. So you can find me there. So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and it's all the same handle, Dr. GFit. And I'm going to put in one more shameless plug for the NASM, by the way. This is actually the new journal that the NASM just put out. It's a peer-reviewed journal. We just launched it. Well, we've done a soft launch right now. We have some articles that are in review. It's been about 1.5 years, 2 years in the making. But it's going to be a first peer-reviewed journal for the National Academy of Sports Medicine, because to your point, NASM has always prided itself in providing evidence-based practice. So now we're actually putting out our own journal that actually is going to publish some of the science related to, and it's the Journal of Fitness, Wellness, and Human Performance. We're going to be seeing some articles coming out in the next few months. We're hoping for our first issue to launch, hopefully in the by mid-year. And we have articles that are being reviewed. It's exciting. So it's something that you can actually get access to, and you can see we have we pride ourselves in that journal for the practical applications piece. So I am the co-editor in chief of the journal, along with my partner, Dr. Scott Cheatham. So we're very excited to launch this as another way to continue your education within health, fitness, wellness, and our PBC folks here.
Awesome. Guys, make sure you take advantage of that. Follow along for your educational journey. Dr. G's got plenty of more exciting stuff to come. And you guys know you can reach out direct to me anytime. You can find me on Instagram at @AndreAdams_official or TeamAdams_prep. You can email me at trainingbydre@gmail.com or find me at andreadamsofficial.com. Guys, until next time, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. G, for joining us. We will see you guys next time on the Peak Physique Podcast.